Okay, so we are entering into the week of Parashat Tazria Metzora. We heard the chanting of the beginning of Tazria from Marshall Kramer. And we're actually going to look at 4 of the verses from the third aliyah that we heard. It was a 5-verse aliyah, so we're looking at most of that aliyah. But before we jump into the text, I want to say a word about the language that I'm going to be using. So we're going to be talking about Tzara'at. And Tzara'at is often translated into English as leprosy. And I'm going to continue to just use the word Tzara'at, the Hebrew word, because it's not exactly the modern understanding of leprosy. And there's also something about Tzara'at, as I put in the title, that's not only a physical ailment, a physical disease, but there's also some spiritual dis-ease that comes along with it. And so I'm just going to call it Tzara'at, but now we can all be on the same page about what we're talking about. And the other 2 words that I want to leave in the Hebrew while we're learning together is the word tameh and the word tahor. And the reason I want to do that is because when we try to translate these words into English, again, it just doesn't fully capture the essence of what those words are. Because like I think I either say or hear every time I'm learning Torah, every translation is an interpretation. So people sometimes will translate tameh and tahor as unclean and clean. I don't love that translation. Also, my Ziegler teachers don't love that translation. We usually go more for tameh being impure and tahor being pure, but even with those English words, it doesn't capture the both physical and spiritual and ritual and ethical elements of the purity or impurity. So we're just going to call it tameh and tahor. You also might hear versions of the words, like for tameh, you might hear tum'ah. For tahor, you might hear Torah. So those are the words we're going to keep in Hebrew. And we're going to go through the verses that we chanted in Hebrew and English. I've asked my parents to help out with some of the reading, but I'm going to start off with reading the first 2 verses in Hebrew and English, and we're going to go through them, and we're going to do a quick reflection on them before moving on to a Talmudic tale that I find very fun and interesting. So we're going to start with Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 13, verses 1 and 2. Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe ve'el Aharon lemor, Adam ki yihye ve'or besaro, Se'et o sapachat o vaheret, vehaya ve'or besaro lenega tzara'at, vehuva el Aharon hakohen o el achad mibanav hakohanim. Adonai spoke to Moshe and Aharon, saying, when a person has on the skin of the body a swelling, a rash, or a discoloration, and it develops into a scaly affection on the skin of the body, it shall be reported to Aharon, the priest, or to one of his sons, the priests. Yes. Avi Mori, my father, my teacher, can you read Leviticus 13, verse 3 in Hebrew and in English?
V'ra'a hakohen et hanega ve'or habasar v'se'ar b'nega hafach lavan u'mareh hanega amok me'or besaro nega tzara'at hu v'ra'ahu hakohen v'timei oto. The priest shall examine the affection on the skin of the body. If hair in the affected patch has turned white and the affection appears to be deeper than the skin of the body, it is an affection of Tzara'at. When the priest sees it, he shall pronounce the person tameh.
Thank you, Avi Mori. Amy Morati, my mother, my teacher, can you read Leviticus 13:4 in Hebrew and English?
Ve'im baheret levana hi be'or besaro v'amok ein mar'eha min ha'or u'se'ara lo hafach lavan v'hiskir hakohen et hanega shivat yamim. But if it is a white discoloration on the skin of the body, which does not appear to be deeper than the skin, and the hair in it has not turned white, the priest shall isolate the affected person for 7 days.
Thank you. So just a little recap on what's going on here. So we have a person who has some sort of rash or swelling or discoloration on their body, and they go to Aharon, or one of the priests. And then there's 2 outcomes. There's the person who they see that this affected patch is white. This word that you'll see coming up a couple times is the word baheret. And there's a white hair, a hair that turns white on that baheret, that white scaly patch, and it's deeper than the skin of the body. So that person, the priest announces, has tzara'at, and announces that this person is tameh, that ritual, spiritual, physical, ethical, potentially impurity, tameh. But if the white discoloration, this baheret thing on their body, is not deeper than the skin, and the hair that's on top of that skin is not white, then it's not tzara'at, and they're not pronounced tameh, and they just have to isolate. So it's just a physical affliction. It's not the spiritual, deeper disease and disease. So with that in mind, I was curious about some of your thoughts on what is the actual difference that's happening between the person in verse 3 and 4. We spoke, I mean, the verses really speak a lot to the physicality of the differences, like we were just, like I was just sort of trying to recap. I'm curious though, like what impressions this leaves you for what person one with the Tzara'at who's tameh is experiencing physically and spiritually, as opposed to person two who does not have Tzara'at, is not pronounced tameh, but does have to isolate for 7 days, what they're going through physically and potentially also spiritually. So if anyone has any thoughts they want to share, if you feel comfortable using the mic, we can pass the mic for people to hear. If you don't, I will try to restate what you said, and all approaches are welcome, and I see a hand already. Yes?
So it says in the second case, what happens to the person? What happens to the person? They isolate for 7 days. But in the first case, it doesn't say what happens to the person. It says, you know, you have tzara'at and you're tameh, but it doesn't say what that person has to do. Do they isolate? Do they go away forever? Do they, you know, right? It doesn't say what they do.
Thank you. Yeah. So there is definitely some unclarity there that needs more explanation. Thank you.
I just find it really interesting that it's all about diagnosis.
Oh, just right.
That it's all about diagnosis and
Oh, right. Here, just you can give it to me. Yeah.
and it's about and how much of an understanding they have about contagion also. Just in terms of the physical part.
Yeah, thank you. So speaking to the physical part, the understanding of contagion and also the diagnosis, that I heard there was a joke about the first dermatologist, but that these priests are serving both, not only in the spiritual way, but diagnosing these contagious diseases. Thank you. Are you?
Well, it seems that in the first verse, actually, which is verse Gimel, that it's a conclusive diagnosis. That surely the person has contracted this skin affliction, and therefore I'm going to, as the priest, will declare him ritually impure, not able to participate in the sacred precinct. The second one, however, is more of an intermediate stage. I'm really not sure what his condition is. Is it really this tzara'at or is it not tzara'at? So therefore, we're going to defer judgment. So for him, we're only going to, or her, we're only going to put this person into isolation. And then we'll have to see what happens after the 7-day period.
Thank you. That's interesting. So that's we talked about some things being unclear about the person who is isolating. No, about the person who has tzara'at. That was our first comment. But there's also some thing left unclear about the second person. They're isolating for 7 days, and then what happens? What do they have? What is going on? Yeah? Oh, no? Okay.
I agree with you. You're isolating the person, which
Are you okay?
is assuming that the person is contaminating others. You know, that right there. I agree. It's unclear.
Yeah.
It's
So
unclear.
there's a lot unclear here. And I think that's actually a really interesting thing that's come up in our discussion so far, because I think it's going to sort of color this Talmudic story, this Talmudic tale. But don't turn over yet, because I am going to give you a little bit of a summary. So this Talmudic tale we're going to look at is found in Masechet, or Tractate Bava Metzia, page 86a. And I'm just going to give a little bit of a summary of the first half of the story because it's a very long and very interesting story, but I figured we would focus in on the second half of it because it's relevant to our verses, but I want to give you the full picture of the story. So the story is about Rabba Bar Nachmani, who is known throughout the Talmud as Rabba. He's a third generation Amora. He's someone who is very prolific in the Talmud. And it was said about him from the king's palace that because of him, the Jewish men were not paying taxes for 2 months of the year. So the palace was mad at Rabbah, and they wanted to either imprison him, potentially execute him. It's a little unclear in the story as to what they wanted to do, but they wanted to bring him in for to punish him for this. Now, the reason that they said that was that there were 2 months out of the year where the Jewish men would study completely in Rabbah's study hall in the month of Adar and in the month of Elul, and they wouldn't work, and so they wouldn't pay taxes because they weren't making money those 2 months. So that's the sort of explanation of that. So there is a messenger sent after Rabbah, and he's looking for Rabbah, and Rabbah is fleeing, and he's going from town to town to town to town. Finally, Rabbah ends up in Pumbedita at this inn. And guess what? The king's messenger also ends up at this inn in Pumbedita, and he's at the pub. And he's drinking a couple drinks, and suddenly a miracle happens, and because Rabbah is staying at this inn too, this man's head turns backwards on his body so that he wouldn't see Rabbah, presumably. So the innkeepers see Rabbah, and they say to him, Rabbah, we know this miracle just happened to protect you, but this is one of the king's guys. We can't let him go back to the palace like that. We can't leave him like that. So Rabbah says, okay, so I'm going to tell you how to give him a drink and how to get his head to turn back around, and then I'll, get out of here so he doesn't catch me. So they do what Rabbah told him to do, This king's messenger's head turns back around. Rabbah gets out of there, and the king's messenger says, because this miracle happened, I know that the man I'm looking for, Rabbah, was here. But because you and he were generous enough to turn my head back around, I am not going to tell them in the king's palace that Rabbah's here. Even if they kill me, I'm not going to tell them that Rabbah's here. But if they do beat me, I'm going to tell them because I don't want to be tortured. So that's his response. So then they put Rabbah in this room so that, they want to have a meeting between Rabbah and the king's messenger. But Rabbah is a little worried about what that meeting might entail, so he prays for mercy. The walls crumble. This is the second miracle of the story. It's just this fun story with all these miracles. The walls crumble, he gets out, and he flees. And this is the part of the story that we enter into in our source sheet, so you can turn over your page now. And we are going to read it in the English, though, of course, we have the Aramaic, and we'll reference some of the Hebrew and Aramaic as we go through it. Does someone want to read the first paragraph of the story as we enter into it on the top of page 3 in the English? You want to take the mic? Thank you. Great, thank you.
He, Rabbah, fled and went to hide in a swamp. He was sitting on the stump of a palm tree and studying Torah alone. At that moment, the sages in the Heavenly Academy were disagreeing with regard to a halakha of Tzara'at. In general, a spot of Tzara'at includes 2 signs of Tumah, a bright white spot and a white hair. The basic halakha is that if the baheret, snow white sore, preceded the white hair, then the afflicted person is tameh. If the white hair preceded the baheret, then the afflicted person is tahor.
Thank you. Does someone want to read the next paragraph in English? Thank you.
The heavenly debate concerned a case of uncertainty as to which came first, the spot or the hair. The Holy Blessed One says the individual is tahor, but every other member of the Heavenly Academy says the person is tameh. And they said, who can arbitrate in this dispute? They agreed that Rabba bar Nachmani should arbitrate. As Rabba bar Nachmani once said, I am preeminent in the halachot of affections, and I am preeminent in the halachot of tameh, imparted by tense.
Thank you. Does someone want to read the third paragraph in English? Yeah, thank you.
They sent a messenger from heaven after him to take his soul up to the heavenly academy. But the angel of death was unable to approach Rabba bar Nachmani, as his mouth did not cease from his Torah study. In the meantime, a wind blew and howled between the branches. Rabba bar Nachmani thought that the noise was due to an infantry battalion about to capture him. He said, "Let that man, that is me, die and not be given over to the hands of the government." The angel of death was therefore able to take his soul.
Thank you so much. So there's a lot going on in this part of the story, and I was very excited that it's this debate, this heavenly debate about Tzara'at. What I want to focus on is this question that you see on the bottom of page 4. Why does the heavenly academy, where the holy blessed one, God, is an active participant, need the opinion of Rabbah? He's a great Torah scholar, a great Talmud scholar. He's a scholar of the Talmud, but he's also a mortal human when compared to the heavenly academy. So why do they need him to arbitrate in the matter of their debate about Tzara'at?
Do they think that having a disease like Sarah is a moral flaw? Because I hate to say it, but I'm too open. If you had a contagious disease, it was a stigma. It wasn't,
Right.
it
Yeah.
somehow became more acceptable
Right.
with COVID
Yeah.
to have something contagious because so many people were getting it.
Right.
But it seems to me that a disease isn't just a disease in here. They talk about the angel of death, and it has a moral connotation. It has a like somebody is bringing this unfortunate upon you.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a really big question here of the question of, what did you say, a moral flaw? The question of whether.
I don't like the term myself.
Oh yeah, no, but I think it's an important question, because that's why I was in the beginning trying to say this isn't Tzara'at that we're talking about. It's not leprosy, because leprosy is we have a modern day understanding of what it is, and there isn't the moral, spiritual.
There was. If you had leprosy, you
Right.
were really shunned.
Right, but
now they know it's nowhere as contagious as they thought it was.
right. But I think that's the distinction that we were looking at in the verses of verse 3 and verse 4 from Leviticus chapter 13, is that there was some sort of an understanding of physical conditions that are just physical. And I think this is something that we, if we can maybe enter into the world of the Talmud and the world of the Torah, that it's not modern diseases, which I don't ever want, especially after like going through COVID, I never want to associate morality or blame with anyone getting any sort of sickness ever. I think that's why I think they're talking about something else. That's why I don't want to call it leprosy. I want to call it Tzara'at, because I think it's something different.
In our tradition, it has been linked to Lashon Hara. So there definitely is,
Right.
at least in our tradition, a moral component to Tzara'at.
Thank you. Yeah. So we have this link to Lashon Hara and Miriam, the story of Miriam, right? Where people in the Torah would get Tzara'at from speaking ill of others. So there's something different going on here that we don't have. Yeah.
I think about something like alcoholism, which they had to resort to calling it a disease to put a neutrality on it, because people put such a moral,
Right.
people associated alcoholism with a debauched morality, so
Right.
to speak, and they had to somehow, let's get the emotionalism out of it.
Yeah.
So they called it a disease to at least put
Right.
neutrality on it.
Yeah.
And I think in our own time, we remember when There was a certain stigma, there was a moral.
Sure. Thank you.
In our own time.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. There's,
Alcoholism immediately comes to mind,
yeah,
you know.
there still are moral stigmas associated with diseases. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, do you want to use the mic over there?
So going to the question about bringing in Rabbah, a mortal human, to arbitrate in the matter of the debate about Tzara'at, the heavenly court is presumably the representation of souls that are not connected to anything physical anymore. Whereas Rabbah, at least until the Malach HaMavet brought him up to get into that, was a human on earth with a body. And remember, he also said that he was an expert, or they said that he was someone that really knew all the information about it, all the different subtleties and nuances and all the halachot. So what they were doing is they wanted him to pull him up because, hey, we're detached from it all. He's in the thick of it. And if we can get him quickly enough up here, he'll still know the answers to those questions. So I think it goes to what, to some degree, Agadot and Midrash go to, which is to understand some kind of connection between those of us who are mortal, of flesh and bones, and those in the spiritual realm. So I think that's what it's talking about.
Thank you so much. Yes, I really, really resonate with that reading. And we're going to, as we continue looking at this Agadah, this Talmudic tale, we're going to go a little bit more in that direction. So thank you for saying that. We have two comments down here. Can I bring you guys the mic? Or yes, no? Yes, no, maybe?
I have two thoughts. One is, it's nice to see that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is taking the lenient position in this argument. But it's really disappointing to me that he's not able to convince even one of the other members of the discussion group that position is correct. And that's distressing. And finally, you know, they picked the wrong guy. I mean, there may have been numerous reasons why it was time for him to go, but he's an expert on Tuma coming from tents. Unfortunately, I have spent a lot of time recently learning about Tuma that comes from tents. It's a very complex and difficult area, but it's not the same as Tzara'at by a long shot. And so it's like, you know, we're going to take the person who's an expert on X and ask him to discuss P. And I just don't think they belong together.
Thank you. Yeah, I think those are two really important points about the question of, did they get the right person or the wrong person?
There's an emotional
Right.
highly subjective component attached to this affliction. That's not positive.
Right. The morality of it all, exactly. Yeah.
Maybe I'm just overly simplifying the question, but Torah is not in heaven anymore. It's been given to man already.
Yeah.
So therefore, you who are the judges in heaven, you no longer have jurisdiction over this case. And therefore, let's talk about somebody who does have jurisdiction, who has to deal with the nitty gritty of the problems of real life and not heavenly life.
Mm-hmm. So I think that connects to what Mel was saying. I think, here. Okay, I'll take it. All right, okay. I think that connects to the comment that was made because, and we're gonna, when we have one more paragraph to read of this, but when we do, we're gonna come back to those two comments because I think that's an interesting read on it as well. Does anyone, so we're gonna turn the page and we have one more paragraph here. Does anyone want to read this paragraph on page 5 in English?
As he was dying, he said in response to the dispute in heaven, "It is Tahor, it is Tahor." A divine voice emerged from heaven and said, "Happy are you, Rabbi Bar Namani, as your body is Tahor and your soul left you with the word Tahor." A note fell from heaven and landed in the Academy of Pumbedita. The note read, "Rabbi Bar Namani was summoned to the Heavenly Academy. He has died." Abaye and Rabbah and all of the other rabbis went out to tend to his burial. However, they did not know the location of his body. They went to the swamp and saw birds forming a shade and hovering over a certain spot. The rabbi said, "We can conclude from this that he is there."
Thank you so much. So the story actually continues a little bit more, and you see the rabbis mourning the death of Rabbah. You see them mourning for 3 days, and then another note falls from heaven and says, actually, you have to mourn him for 7 days. So you see the rabbis sitting Shiva, essentially, for Rabbah. And then there's an epilogue at the end, which is an interesting sort of tale of God and the elements, and I believe... a hurricane and an Arab riding on his camel. And for the epilogue, I encourage you to turn to Bava Metzia 86a if you're interested. It's just such an interesting story, I find. But I want to talk about how the story ends. And I want to go back to the comments that were made about, it is not, the Torah is not in the heavens. It's of the human realm, and this thing that about needing to go to the expert, whether or not it was the right expert, needing a human to talk to the question of the physical. So I think you must have been, I'm assuming you're referencing the story of the Tanur Shel Achnai when you say that it is not in the heavens, the story about when there was the debate you may be familiar with about the kashrut of a certain oven. And the sort of outcome of that is that it's actually up to humans to make these decisions. It's not up to God anymore. The interesting thing that I thought about that story when reading this story, because it's sort of an inverse. You have in that story the majority of the rabbis who think one thing, and you have one rabbi who thinks something else, and that one rabbi goes to God and says, "What's the answer?" And God is in agreement with the one singular person, and then the majority say, "But lo bashamayim hi, it's not in the heavens." And this is the inverse of that. We have the heavenly academy, the yeshiva barakia, as they call it, the Aramaic word for yeshiva in the rakia, in the heavens. And you have all of them thinking one thing. They all think that this person is tameh, and then you have Hakadosh Baruch Hu, God, saying this person is tahor, and they need that one person, and that one person is in agreement with God, who is the singular voice of tahor. And so the question I have is it in the heavens? Is it in the earth? I made, when I was studying this earlier, I made the joke. Do you guys know the joke about what do you think? My name is Fink, I sell clothes for nothing. If you don't know it, I feel like I might have shared it at Beth once before, but I'll share it again because it's a good one. There was someone who saw a sign in a shop window, and it said, "What do you think? My name is Fink, I sell clothes for nothing." There was no punctuation. This is just how the person read it. So they went in and they said, "I'd like some clothes, please." And then he, thought he didn't have to pay anything. But then Fink said to him, he was like, "But your sign in your window says, 'What do you think? My name is Fink, I sell clothes for nothing.'" He said, "You read it wrong. It says, 'What do you think? My name is Fink, I sell clothes for nothing.'" So I sort of thought of the phrase "Lo bashamayim hi," and the way we often read it, obviously in the Tanur Shel Achnai story, is "Lo bashamayim hi," period. It's not in the heavens. But in this case, it's "Lo bashamayim hi." Maybe we have, and it's maybe a mixture of both, because maybe it's not in the heavens and maybe it is in the heavens. And what I mean by that is this Tzara'at as this example of the physical and the spiritual rubbing up against each other. So we have the physical world that we as humans are supposed to be able to understand, at least on some level. And then we have the spiritual, which is still in the realm of the heavens. And so what I think is interesting is in the end of the story, it had to be at the moment as Rabbah was dying that he could respond to the dispute in the heavens, that he could say tahor, because he was still in the human physical world, but he was making that transition into the heavenly realm. So it was in that in-between space that he was able to say that. And I also want to bring up something about in that moment, there's something to be said about this partnership with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with God, in that moment. Because you need the voice of the human to say tahor, and you also need the voice of God to say tahor. It's this partnership, I think, that this Talmudic tale really speaks to, and I think that helps me to understand, going back to Tazria Metzora, what's going on with Tzara'at. Because this issue of tameh and tahor is this physical and spiritual balance, I think the answer is going back to our relationship with God, which I think can sometimes be really uncomfortable, and I think there's a lot of room for exploration that we all can do in that. So I want to leave us with this question to sort of reflect on as you move through the week. And it's the question at the bottom of page 5. In what way or in what ways do you understand being in partnership with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with God? And in what moments in your life have you experienced this connection between the physical and the spiritual? So I want to leave us with the blessing that whether it's in the realm of the tameh, in the things that don't necessarily feel completely, that might feel impure, whether physically, spiritually, ethically, ritually, or whether in the realm of the tahor, the things that do feel physically, ethically, spiritually, ritually pure, that we notice during the week those times where the physical and the spiritual rub up against each other in our own lives. And with that, I wish you a Shabbat Shalom for the last little piece of Shabbat we have left. And with that, before we move to Birkat Hamazon, I want to sing.
Yael,
Yes.
I just want to tell you one quick thing. I won't take the time, but if you want another version of that joke,
Yeah.
put in Google Lenin Trotsky joke.
Okay, I will. A Lenin Trotsky joke. I will look that up. Thank you. All right, so before we do Birkat Hamazon, if for the people who had bagels, had bread, I mentioned last night that we are in the week of Gvura, and today actually has been Gvura Shebi Gvura. It is the Gvura of Gvura Day. I translate as strength, power, resiliency, boundaries. This morning at Hama'alot, for those of you who were there, they translated it as discipline. But however you translate it, we're in the week of Gvura. And something that I learned in this Omer book that I've been enjoying reading, that I got in Israel last year, is that there are songs that are connected to these weeks of the Omer, to these weeks that have the Sfirot, these divine emanations of God mapped onto these weeks. So the type of song that's connected to the week of Gvura is the Zemer. So we don't always do Zmirot here, but I wanted to do 2. So in a bencher, if you have one of these, on page 24, you will find Dror Yikra, and I wanted to sing Dror Yikra together. And there's enough verses that if you don't know the tune already, you will catch on by the time we're at the end of it. So Dror Yikra on page 24. Dror Yikra leven uvat veyinsarchem kemo vavat veyinsar neim shimchem velo yushpat shavu nuchu beyom Shabbat derosh navi ve'ulami ve'od yeshaseh imi netasorek betoch karmi she'eshavat b'nei ami deroch pura betoch batzra וגם בבל אשר גברה נטות צרי באף עברה Shema koli beyom ekra, Elohim ten b'midbar har, Hadas shita berosh tidhar, velamazhir, velanis har, shelomim ten kemei nahar, Hadoch kamay Elkanah, B'mog levav v'imgina, v'narchiv peh, unmale na leshonenu lecharina, de'er chochma lenafshecha, vehi chetel roshecha, vehi tzornish mitzvah, kedoshecha, shemor Shabbat kodshecha. Thank you. And I also would love it if we could do the classic Seudah Shlishit song on page 44 in the bencher, or if you're in Lev Shalem, it's on page 233. Mizmor LeDavid. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai roi lo echsar, minot eshe yarbitzeni, al mei menuchot yinhaleni, nafshi eshovev, nafshi eshovev, yancheni v'maglei tzedek leman shemo, gam ki elech begeit salmavet, lo irara ki ata imadi, shivtecha umishantecha, shivtecha umishantecha, hema yenachamuni, taroch lefanai shulchan, taroch lefanai shulchan, taroch lefanai shulchan, neged zorerai, dishanta v'shemen roshi, dishanta v'shemen roshi, dishanta v'shemen roshi, kosi revaya, ach tov v'chesed, yirdefuni kol yemei chayai, Veshavti beveit Adonai, Veshavti beveit Adonai, leorech yamim, yananai nai nai nai, yananai nai nai nai, yananai nai 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 nai,